My name is Ibrahim Traore. I speak to you today not only as the president of Burkina Faso, but as a man who has walked through difficult questions about leadership, faith, and responsibility. I speak to Muslims, to Christians, to the leaders of the Sahel, and to people across the world who still believe that God guides the hearts of those who seek Him. And I speak especially to those who are older, those who have lived long enough to see promises broken and hopes delayed. Many of you watching from America or the United Kingdom understand something about history. You know that nations are shaped not only by power, but by the conscience of those who lead. My story is simple. I was born in a land rich beyond imagination, yet burdened by poverty. Burkina Faso sits on soil filled with gold. Across the African continent, nearly 1/3 of the world's mineral resources lie beneath our ground. Nearly half of the planet's known gold reserves are found on African land. And yet, millions of our people still struggle to live. In my own country, Burkina Faso produces around 70 tons of gold every year. By the numbers, that should bring prosperity. It should bring schools, hospitals, roads, and dignity. But according to international reports, more than 40% of our people still live below the poverty line. That is the question that kept me awake long before I became president. If Africa is so rich, why are her children still poor? This is not a question of geology. It is a question of leadership. For decades, agreements were signed. Treaties were celebrated. Foreign partnerships were praised. Each time, the promise was the same: development, security, prosperity. But when the dust settled, too often the wealth flowed outward while the suffering remained. And this is why I began to speak openly about something many leaders hesitate to say. A leader must seek guidance from God before signing agreements that shape the destiny of millions, not as a ritual, not as a performance, but as a genuine search for wisdom, because when a leader forgets God, he may begin to serve power instead of people. And when that happens, nations can lose their future with a stroke of a pen. This is the story I want to tell you. It is not a story about politics. It is a story about conscience, faith, and the heavy responsibility of leadership in a world where decisions made in quiet rooms can shape generations. If you wish to hear the rest of this story, the lessons learned from decades of international agreements and foreign interventions in Africa, then continue with me, because the next chapter explains why many leaders in the Sahel have begun to rethink the path that brought us here. When I was a young officer, long before I ever imagined standing before the world as president, I spent many nights studying the history of Africa. Not the short summaries written in foreign textbooks, but the deeper history, the history told by elders, by teachers, by soldiers, and by the quiet evidence left behind in villages that never received the prosperity they were promised. Again and again, the same pattern appeared. Agreements were signed, speeches were made, and hope briefly filled the air, but the results often told a different story. For many decades, African governments signed agreements with powerful nations and large international corporations. These agreements covered many areas: mining, energy, military cooperation, trade, and currency systems. On paper, these agreements often looked beneficial. They promised investment. They promised security. They promised development. But time has a way of revealing the true weight of decisions. One of the most well-known examples is the currency system known as the CFA franc. For many countries in West Africa, this currency was historically tied to France. It created a structure that connected our monetary policies to decisions made outside the continent. Some leaders defended the system. They argued it brought stability. Others began to question whether stability without sovereignty could truly serve the long-term future of our nations. I remember listening to older economists speak quietly about this issue. They did not shout. They did not accuse. They simply asked a simple question. If a nation cannot fully control its currency, how much control does it truly have over its economic destiny? It was a question that stayed with me. Another example came through military cooperation. For many years, foreign troops operated in parts of the Sahel region, including Mali and Niger. Their presence was officially intended to help fight terrorism and stabilize the region. Security is a real concern for us. Anyone who has lived in the Sahel knows the pain caused by violence and instability. But over time, debates began to grow within our societies. People asked whether these long-term foreign military presences truly strengthened sovereignty or whether they created new forms of dependency. In villages across the region, ordinary citizens began asking questions that leaders could no longer ignore. Why, after many years of international security partnerships, did instability still exist? Why did the promised stability take so long to appear? And perhaps the most difficult question of all, who truly benefits from these arrangements? These questions are not accusations, they are reflections. And reflection is necessary for any nation that hopes to grow. Africa has signed thousands of agreements with foreign governments and multinational companies over the past several decades. Many of these agreements were entered into with good intentions, but not all good intentions lead to good outcomes. Sometimes leaders sign documents under pressure. Sometimes they sign them in moments of crisis. Sometimes they sign them because the alternatives appear limited. And sometimes, sadly, decisions are influenced by corruption. When a leader is separated from moral responsibility, it becomes easier to sign away the future of a nation. This is not an African problem. It is a human problem. Power can weaken the conscience of any leader in any country. That is why faith matters. Faith reminds a leader that he answers to something higher than political pressure. Faith reminds a leader that every signature carries consequences. And faith reminds a leader that history will judge the choices made in moments when the world was not watching. Over the past few years, many people have spoken about the political changes that occurred in the Sahel region. Mali experienced a change in leadership. Burkina Faso experienced a change in leadership. Niger experienced a change in leadership. Observers from outside Africa often describe these events using one simple word: coups. But for many people living in the region, the conversation was more complex. People spoke about sovereignty. They spoke about dignity. They spoke about the desire for African nations to rethink relationships that had existed for decades. These conversations were not born from anger alone. They were born from long memories. Memories of promises that did not always lead to the future people expected. As these conversations spread, 3 nations in the Sahel began moving toward closer cooperation: Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. Together, they formed what is now known as the Alliance of Sahel States. This alliance was not created to isolate our nations from the world. It was created to strengthen cooperation among neighbors who share common challenges: security, economic development, political independence. These are not radical goals. They are the same goals every nation seeks. Yet pursuing them requires courage, because re-examining long-standing agreements can create tension. Powerful interests do not always welcome change. But leadership sometimes requires asking uncomfortable questions. Questions such as, Are our resources benefiting our people? Are our partnerships balanced and respectful? Are our decisions guided by wisdom or by pressure? These are the questions I began asking myself when I first stepped into leadership. And I realized something very important. Political strategy alone is not enough to answer them. Economics alone is not enough to answer them. Military strength alone is not enough to answer them. A leader must also examine his conscience. And for me, that examination led back to faith. Not faith as a political slogan, but faith as a guide for responsibility. In Africa, religion is not a small part of life. It is woven deeply into our cultures and our communities. Christians gather in churches across the continent every week. Muslims gather in mosques across the continent every day. In villages and cities alike, people pray before important decisions. So when leaders speak about seeking guidance from God, many citizens understand exactly what that means. It means pausing before power. It means humility before authority. It means remembering that the lives of millions can be affected by one decision. When a treaty is placed on a table, it may appear to be a simple document, but in truth, it can shape decades of history. A mining agreement can determine whether wealth remains in the country or flows outward. A security agreement can determine whether sovereignty grows stronger or weaker. A financial agreement can shape the economic freedom of future generations. These decisions cannot be taken lightly. And that is why I have said many times that leaders should seek guidance from the Holy Spirit before signing agreements that affect the destiny of their people. Some people misunderstand this statement. They think it is about religion controlling politics. That is not what I mean. What I mean is something much simpler. A leader must seek wisdom beyond his own ambition. He must ask himself whether his decision serves his people or serves his own power. Prayer can help a leader ask those questions honestly. And when leaders pray sincerely, something remarkable often happens. They become more cautious, more thoughtful, more aware of the consequences of their actions. In a world driven by speed and competition, that pause can be powerful, because history shows us that many harmful decisions were made in moments when leaders rushed forward without reflection. Africa cannot afford many more of those moments. Our continent has extraordinary potential. Our land is rich. Our people are resilient. Our cultures are ancient. But our future depends on the wisdom of our decisions today. The world is changing rapidly. New alliances are forming. Old systems are being questioned. And Africa now stands at a crossroads. Will we continue repeating the same patterns of dependency? Or will we build partnerships based on mutual respect and true sovereignty? That question is not answered by anger. It is answered by clarity. And clarity often begins with reflection. Reflection on our past. Reflection on our values. Reflection on our responsibilities as leaders. For me, that reflection always leads back to one simple truth. Leadership without conscience can destroy nations. Leadership guided by wisdom can rebuild them. And sometimes the quiet moment of prayer before signing a document can shape the destiny of millions. That is a lesson I learned from studying the treaties and interventions of the past. History does not exist only to be remembered. It exists to teach. And if we listen carefully, it can help us avoid repeating mistakes that once seemed inevitable. The core message of this first lesson is simple. Africa must examine its past agreements with honesty, not to blame others, but to understand how the future can be shaped differently. Only by learning from history can a continent truly move forward. And that realization leads directly to the next question. If leaders must carry such responsibility, how should they prepare themselves morally and spiritually for that role? Because power alone does not prepare a person for leadership. Character does. Faith does. Responsibility does. And in the next part of this story, I will speak about the deeper responsibility that comes with leadership, the responsibility that connects power with faith, and why many African leaders believe that spiritual guidance must accompany political authority. There is something the world often misunderstands about Africa. Many people see our continent only through statistics. They talk about minerals, markets, conflicts, and development indexes. They measure Africa through numbers and reports. But if you truly want to understand Africa, you must look deeper than statistics. You must understand the soul of the people. Across the continent, faith is not a distant concept. It is part of daily life. It shapes how families gather, how communities support each other, and how people interpret both suffering and hope. In villages where electricity is scarce, you will still hear prayers rising in the evening air. In crowded cities, churches and mosques stand side by side, filled with people who believe that life has meaning beyond material wealth. This is the Africa I know. It is an Africa where faith guides the conscience of ordinary people. And because of that, many believe faith should also guide those who hold power. When I began speaking publicly about the importance of seeking guidance from the Holy Spirit before making major decisions, some observers outside Africa seemed surprised. They asked why a political leader would speak openly about spiritual guidance. But for many Africans, the question felt natural. If a farmer prays before planting his crops, why should a president not pray before shaping the future of a nation? If a mother prays for the safety of her children, why should a leader not pray for the well-being of millions? Leadership carries enormous responsibility. Every decision a leader makes can affect generations. A policy decision can influence the economy for decades. A security decision can affect the safety of entire regions. A treaty signed in one moment can shape the opportunities available to future children who are not yet born. When leaders forget the weight of these responsibilities, decisions become careless. But when leaders remember the moral weight of the authority, they begin to approach power with humility. Humility is not weakness. In fact, humility may be the most important quality a leader can possess. A humble leader understands that he does not have all the answers. A humble leader seeks counsel. He listens to advisors. He listens to his people. And sometimes he listens to God. Throughout history, some of the most respected leaders were those who believed their authority came with moral accountability. In many religious traditions, leaders are described as stewards rather than owners of power. They are entrusted with responsibility for a limited time. Their duty is to protect and serve the people placed under their care. When a leader views power as ownership, corruption often follows. But when a leader views power as stewardship, responsibility becomes central. In Africa, this understanding resonates deeply. Our societies have long traditions that emphasize community, responsibility, and moral authority. In many villages, elders were respected not simply because they were older, but because they demonstrated wisdom and integrity. They settled disputes. They guided younger generations. They reminded communities of shared values. Modern political leadership should not abandon those principles. Instead, it should build upon them. When I speak about seeking guidance from the Holy Spirit, I am speaking about reconnecting leadership with moral reflection. The Holy Spirit, in Christian understanding, represents wisdom, discernment, and guidance. It reminds believers that truth cannot always be discovered through power alone. Sometimes truth is found through patience, prayer, and humility. But Africa is also home to millions of Muslims. Our continent includes vibrant Islamic communities that have contributed deeply to our culture and history. Muslim scholars have shaped education, law, and social life in many African societies for centuries. For Muslim believers, seeking guidance from God through prayer and reflection is also central. So when I speak about spiritual guidance, I do not speak only to Christians. I speak to Muslims as well. Both traditions share something important. They teach that leaders must be accountable before God. This idea has profound implications for leadership. If a leader believes he answers only to political allies, he may act recklessly. If he believes he answers to God as well, he may act more carefully. Faith does not eliminate mistakes. Leaders are still human, but faith can slow the impulse towards selfish decisions. It reminds leaders that power is temporary. It reminds them that their legacy will be measured not by wealth or prestige, but by whether they serve their people with honesty. In recent years, Africa has experienced many discussions about corruption. These discussions are painful but necessary. Corruption weakens institutions. It drains resources that should benefit citizens. It destroys trust between governments and the people they serve. Many African citizens are deeply frustrated by corruption. They see resources leaving their countries while poverty remains. They see leaders living comfortably while communities struggle. This frustration is understandable, but solving corruption requires more than new laws. It requires a transformation of values. Laws can punish corruption after it occurs, but moral responsibility can prevent it before it begins. That is where faith becomes important. When a leader sincerely believes that his decisions will be judged by God, he may hesitate before betraying the trust placed in him. He may pause before accepting a bribe. He may question whether signing a certain agreement truly benefits his people. These moments of hesitation matter. They are the moments when conscience speaks. Throughout Africa, many citizens hope for leaders who listen to that voice. They do not expect perfection, but they hope for sincerity. They hope for leaders who understand the moral weight of their position. The conversations about faith in leadership are not limited to Burkina Faso. Across the continent, religious leaders and community leaders often encourage political leaders to remember their spiritual responsibilities. Churches pray for wisdom for those in government. Mosques offer guidance about justice and accountability. In many ways, Africa's spiritual traditions continue to shape its political conversations. Some observers outside the continent view this mixture of faith and politics with caution. They worry about religious influence on government decisions. These concerns deserve thoughtful discussion. History has shown that religion can sometimes be misused by those seeking power. But faith itself is not the danger. The danger comes when leaders manipulate religion for political gain. True faith does the opposite. True faith restrains power. It reminds leaders that they must serve something greater than themselves. When I speak about the Holy Spirit guiding leaders, I am not calling for religious domination. I am calling for moral reflection. I am calling for leaders to pause before signing documents that shape the lives of millions. I am calling for leaders to remember that decisions made in quiet offices can determine whether future generations inherit prosperity or struggle. Africa is entering a new era. Young people across the continent are demanding change. They are asking hard questions about governance, sovereignty, and development. They want leaders who will protect their future rather than compromise it. And they want leaders who possess integrity. Integrity cannot be manufactured through speeches. It grows from character. And character is often shaped by values learned long before someone enters politics. In many African households, children are taught to respect elders, honor community, and fear God. These lessons form the foundation of moral responsibility. If those lessons remain alive when someone enters public office, they can guide decisions in powerful ways. I often think about the moment when a leader signs a treaty. The room is usually quiet, advisors are present, documents are placed on the table, pens are prepared. To an outside observer, it may appear like a routine ceremony, but that moment can carry enormous consequences. With one signature, a leader may grant access to resources that belong to an entire nation. With one signature, he may create partnerships that influence the economy for decades. With one signature, he may shape opportunities for future generations. When I imagine that moment, I believe something important should happen before the pen touches the paper. The leader should pause, he should reflect, and he should ask himself a question that no advisor can answer for him. Is this decision truly in the best interest of my people? Prayer can help create that pause, not as a performance for cameras, but as a private moment of conscience. A moment when ambition falls silent. A moment when responsibility becomes clear. Some may say this approach is idealistic. They may argue that global politics is driven by strategy, competition, and power. There is truth in that observation. The world is not simple, but complexity does not eliminate the need for conscience. In fact, the more complicated the world becomes, the more important moral clarity becomes. Without it, powerful decisions can easily drift towards self-interest. Africa's future will depend not only on economic policies and military strength, it will depend on the character of those who lead. Character shaped by responsibility, character shaped by humility, character shaped by faith. The core message of this second lesson is clear. Leadership must combine power with moral accountability. Political authority without ethical reflection can damage nations, but leadership guided by conscience can help rebuild trust and dignity. Across Africa, millions of people hope for leaders who remember this truth. Leaders who understand that their authority carries both political and spiritual responsibility, and this understanding is becoming even more important as the Sahel region enters a period of political transformation. In the next part of this story, I will speak about the political changes that have recently occurred across the Sahel. Events that have drawn the attention of the entire world. Events that reflect deeper questions about sovereignty, independence, and the future direction of our nations. These events did not appear suddenly. They grew from years of frustration, hope, and desire for change. Understanding them requires patience, and it requires listening not only to headlines, but to the voices of the people who live in the region. Because sometimes the most important stories are not the loudest ones. Sometimes they are the quiet questions rising from villages, cities, and communities across a continent searching for its future. There are moments in history when quiet frustration slowly gathers strength. For years, it may appear invisible. People continue their daily routines, governments operate, agreements remain in place, the world observes events through distant headlines, but beneath the surface, questions grow. And eventually, those questions become powerful enough to reshape political landscapes. In the Sahel region of Africa, something like this began to unfold over the past several years. The Sahel is a vast belt of land stretching across the continent south of the Sahara Desert. It is a region of resilience, hardship, and deep cultural history. For generations, communities here have lived close to the land. They have endured droughts, economic challenges, and the pressures of modern geopolitics. Yet despite these difficulties, the people of the Sahel possess remarkable strength. But strength alone cannot silence frustration forever. By the time the new decade began, many citizens across the region were asking difficult questions about governance, security, and sovereignty. In Mali, political tensions reached a turning point when the government changed in the year 2020. The event was widely described internationally as a coup. Observers around the world debated its implications. But inside Mali, many citizens spoke about something deeper. They spoke about the need for new leadership. They spoke about frustration with systems that had failed to deliver stability and progress. 2 years later, in Burkina Faso, similar tensions were unfolding. My own country faced serious security challenges. Communities in rural areas lived under constant threat from armed groups. Families were displaced. Villages were abandoned. Citizens demanded stronger leadership and clearer direction. In the year 2022, the political structure changed, and I found myself carrying the responsibility of leading Burkina Faso. The world quickly analyzed the event through familiar political terminology, but for those of us living inside the reality of the Sahel, the questions were more personal. How could our nations regain control of their future? How could we strengthen security for our people? How could we ensure that our natural resources truly benefited our citizens? Then, in the year 2023, another political shift occurred in Niger. Again, the world reacted quickly. Again, headlines spread across international media. And again, many citizens in the region focus on a deeper issue: sovereignty. The word sovereignty can sometimes sound abstract, but for many African citizens, it represents something very concrete. It means the ability of a nation to make decisions based on the needs of its people. It means economic policies shaped by local priorities rather than external pressure. It means security strategies designed by those who understand the realities on the ground. For decades, the Sahel had experienced a complex mixture of international cooperation, foreign military presence, development programs, and economic partnerships. Some of these efforts brought assistance. Some provided valuable resources, but many citizens felt that their countries remained caught between competing global interests. The result was a growing desire for a new direction. This desire did not come from one leader alone. It came from conversations across communities, from students discussing the future in universities, from farmers wondering why fertile land still produced little prosperity, from soldiers risking their lives to protect villages, from families hoping their children might inherit a more stable country. These conversations eventually helped shape a new form of regional cooperation. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger began working together more closely. The goal was not isolation. It was partnership built on shared challenges and shared aspirations. This cooperation led to the creation of the Alliance of Sahel States. The alliance represents an effort to strengthen security cooperation and political independence among the three nations. It reflects a belief that neighbors facing similar difficulties can achieve more by supporting one another. Security remains one of the most urgent concerns in the region. Communities have endured years of violence from armed groups operating across vast territories. Villagers who once lived peacefully now face constant uncertainty. Markets that once connected communities have been disrupted. Children in some areas have grown up hearing the sounds of conflict instead of the sounds of classrooms. These realities cannot be ignored. They require strong coordination between governments. They require careful strategies, and they require the trust of the people. The Alliance of Sahel States was formed partly to strengthen that coordination. By working together, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger hope to share intelligence, coordinate security operations, and reduce vulnerabilities across borders. But security cooperation is only one part of the vision. The alliance also reflects a broader aspiration, a desire for greater political independence, a desire for economic policies that prioritize national development, a desire for partnerships based on mutual respect. These aspirations resonate deeply with many citizens across Africa. For generations, Africans have dreamed of a continent that controls its own destiny. A continent where resources are used to build prosperity for local communities. A continent where young people can pursue opportunities without feeling forced to leave their homelands. Achieving that vision will not be simple. The global system is complex. International relationships involve many competing interests. Economic structures developed over decades cannot be transformed overnight. But change often begins with courage. The courage to ask whether old systems still serve their original purpose. The courage to imagine new paths forward. And the courage to take responsibility for shaping those paths. Some observers outside Africa have expressed concern about these developments. They worry about instability. They worry about the future of regional cooperation. These concerns deserve thoughtful attention. No nation benefits from chaos. Stability is essential for development, investment, and the well-being of citizens. But stability must be built on legitimacy. It must reflect the confidence of the people. And that confidence grows when citizens believe their leaders are acting in their interest. Across the Sahel, many people hope that new leadership will bring renewed focus on sovereignty, security, and economic justice. They hope that cooperation among neighboring nations will strengthen regional resilience. They hope that decisions about resources, trade, and development will increasingly reflect local priorities. These hopes are not unrealistic. They are rooted in a simple belief. Every nation deserves the opportunity to determine its own future. This belief does not reject international cooperation. Partnerships between nations remain essential in an interconnected world. Trade, technology, education, and cultural exchange can enrich societies. But true partnership requires balance. It requires respect for sovereignty. It requires transparency in agreements. And it requires leaders who place the well-being of their citizens above external pressures. This is where the connection between politics and faith becomes visible again. When leaders seek spiritual guidance before making major decisions, they are reminded of their responsibility to the people they serve. They remember that power is not an end in itself. It is a tool entrusted to them for a limited time. Faith can strengthen the courage required to pursue difficult reforms. It can encourage leaders to resist corruption. It can inspire them to prioritize justice over convenience. In times of political change, these qualities become especially important because transitions often bring uncertainty. Citizens may wonder what the future holds. They may worry about economic stability. They may question whether new leadership will truly bring improvement. Leaders must respond to those concerns with honesty. They must demonstrate that change is guided by principles rather than ambition, and they must communicate clearly with their people. The political transformations in the Sahel are still unfolding. History will take time to evaluate their long-term consequences. But one thing is already clear. They reflect a deeper conversation taking place across Africa, a conversation about sovereignty, a conversation about dignity, a conversation about whether the continent can move toward a future shaped more strongly by its own voice. For me personally, these events carry both weight and hope. Weight, because leadership in such times requires careful judgment. Hope, because the willingness to question old systems suggests that new possibilities may emerge. But political change alone cannot transform a continent. True transformation requires something deeper. It requires unity among the people. It requires cooperation across communities. And it requires the shared belief that a better future is possible. Across Africa, faith often plays an important role in sustaining that belief. Churches, mosques, and community gatherings remind people that hardship does not last forever. They remind communities that perseverance can eventually produce renewal, and they remind leaders that their authority carries moral responsibility. The core message of this third lesson is simple. Political change must be guided by principles. Sovereignty must be balanced with cooperation. And leadership must remain accountable to both the people and the moral values that sustain society. Across the Sahel, citizens are watching carefully. They are hoping that the choices made today will lead to greater stability, dignity, and opportunity, and their hopes bring us to the next part of this story. Because beyond political change lies another powerful force shaping the future of Africa. The faith and unity of the African people themselves, their beliefs, their resilience, their determination to build a future worthy of the generations that will come after them. When people speak about Africa, they often describe geography, politics, and resources. But the true strength of Africa has always been its people. Across a continent of immense diversity, there exists something that quietly binds communities together. It is not language, it is not borders. It is something deeper. Faith. For millions of Africans, faith is not an abstract philosophy. It is the rhythm of daily life. In the early morning hours, before the heat of the day arrives, prayers rise from homes and villages. Some kneel in churches, others bow in mosques, some pray quietly beside their beds. These moments rarely appear in international news, but they reveal something essential about the spirit of the continent. Faith sustains hope. Africa has endured centuries of hardship. Colonial rule reshaped borders and economies. External powers competed for influence across vast territories. Economic systems often left local communities with limited control over their own resources. And yet, through these difficulties, people continue to believe that tomorrow could be better than today. That belief is powerful. It gives strength to farmers working the land despite uncertain rains. It gives courage to teachers standing before classrooms filled with children who dream of a different future. It gives resilience to families rebuilding their lives after conflict or displacement. Faith has been part of Africa's story for centuries. Christianity arrived on the continent very early in history. Ancient Christian communities flourished in places such as Ethiopia and Egypt long before many parts of Europe adopted the faith. Islam also spread across Africa through trade and scholarship. Muslim scholars helped build centers of learning in cities like Timbuktu, where knowledge of theology, science, and law once attracted students from across the world. Today, nearly half of Africa's population identifies as Christian. Millions more identify as Muslim. And in many communities, these traditions coexist peacefully. Church bells and the call to prayer sometimes echo across the same neighborhoods. Families include members of both faiths. Communities celebrate shared values of compassion, generosity, and respect for elders. This coexistence is not perfect. No society is without tension. But in many places across Africa, religious communities have learned to live side by side with remarkable resilience. That coexistence offers an important lesson. Faith does not have to divide people. It can unite them. It can remind communities that despite differences in belief or tradition, they share a common humanity. For leaders, this unity carries profound meaning. When a leader speaks about faith, he is speaking a language many citizens understand deeply, but he must also speak carefully, because faith should inspire unity, not division. When I speak about seeking guidance from God, I do not mean that one religion should dominate another. Burkina Faso itself is home to both Muslims and Christians. Many families include members of both communities. We pray differently, but we share the same hopes for peace and prosperity. A leader must honor that diversity. He must protect the freedom of every citizen to worship according to their conscience. And he must ensure that faith becomes a source of harmony rather than conflict. In times of uncertainty, faith can strengthen unity among the people. When communities face economic hardship or security challenges, religious institutions often become centers of support. Churches organize assistance for struggling families. Mosques provide guidance and charity for those in need. Religious leaders often act as mediators during conflicts, encouraging dialogue and reconciliation. Their influence reaches far beyond the walls of religious buildings. They help maintain the moral fabric of society. This influence is particularly important in regions experiencing political change. When governments transition, citizens may feel uncertain about the future. They may worry about stability. They may question whether promises of reform will truly lead to improvement. During such moments, faith communities often provide reassurance. They remind people that patience and perseverance can overcome adversity. They encourage citizens to pursue peace rather than division, and they remind leaders that their authority should serve the common good. Across Africa, many citizens believe that moral leadership begins with humility before God. This belief does not require leaders to impose religion on government. Instead, it encourages leaders to remember that power should never be exercised without conscience. Faith teaches accountability. It teaches that every action has consequences. It teaches that leaders are responsible not only to political allies, but also to the people they serve and to the moral principles that guide society. These teachings resonate strongly in African cultures. Many communities place great importance on the concept of collective responsibility. The success of one person is often seen as connected to the well-being of the entire community. Similarly, the failure of leadership affects everyone. When leaders misuse power, the consequences spread across society. But when leaders act with integrity, the benefits also spread. Schools improve. Healthcare expands. Economic opportunities grow. Trust between citizens and institutions strengthens. Faith can encourage leaders to pursue that integrity because faith reminds them that leadership is not simply a position of authority. It is a calling to serve. Across Africa, young people are watching closely. They represent one of the youngest populations in the world. Millions of children and young adults will shape the future of the continent in the coming decades. They are energetic, ambitious, and increasingly connected to global ideas through technology. But they also carry concerns. They want to know whether their countries will provide opportunities for them to build meaningful lives. They want to know whether the wealth beneath their soil will translate into schools, industries, and innovation. They want to know whether leadership will protect their future or compromise it. Faith communities often play a role in shaping the values of these young generations. Churches teach compassion and service. Mosques teach discipline and justice. Families pass down traditions that emphasize respect, honesty, and perseverance. If these values remain strong, they can guide the next generation of leaders. Africa's future will not be decided by one president or one government. It will be shaped by millions of citizens who believe their continent deserves dignity and prosperity. Unity among those citizens is essential. Division weakens societies, but shared values can strengthen them. Faith often provides those shared values: compassion for the vulnerable, respect for elders, responsibility toward community, and belief that moral choices matter. When leaders acknowledge these values, they can build stronger connections with the people they serve. They can remind citizens that national development is not only an economic project, it is also a moral project. It involves building societies where justice, honesty, and cooperation guide decisions. Africa's path towards such a future will not be easy. Economic challenges remain significant. Security threats continue in certain regions. Global competition for resources and influence adds complexity to international relationships. But the resilience of the African people should never be underestimated. For centuries, communities across this continent have demonstrated remarkable endurance. They have adapted to changing circumstances. They have preserved cultural traditions despite external pressures. True, and they have continued to believe that their children deserve a better tomorrow. Faith often sustains that belief. It reminds people that hardship does not define their destiny. It reminds them that perseverance can transform challenges into opportunity. And it reminds leaders that their decisions should honor the hopes of the people who trust them. The core message of this fourth lesson is clear. Africa's greatest strength lies in the unity and faith of its people. These qualities can inspire leaders to act with integrity. They can encourage communities to work together despite differences, and they can help the continent pursue a future shaped by dignity, cooperation, and hope. But unity and faith must eventually translate into practical vision. Belief alone cannot build industries. Prayer alone cannot develop infrastructure. Faith must inspire action. And that action requires a clear vision for Africa's future. In the final lesson of this story, I will speak about that vision A vision of an Africa that controls its resources. An Africa that builds its own industries. An Africa that reduces dependency while strengthening partnerships based on respect. And a vision in which courage, unity, and faith guide the path toward a more just and independent future. When people ask about the future of Africa, I often pause before answering. Not because the question is difficult, but because the answer carries enormous responsibility. The future of a continent cannot be reduced to one speech or one policy. It is built slowly through decisions made over many years, yet there is a vision that many Africans increasingly share. A vision of dignity, a vision of responsibility, a vision of a continent that participates in the world not as a passive supplier of raw materials, but as a strong and confident partner. For a long time, Africa's role in the global economy has been defined largely by extraction. Minerals are taken from the ground. Resources are exported, then finished products returned to our markets at higher prices. This system has existed for generations. It has created wealth in many places around the world, but too often the communities closest to the resources have seen the smallest benefits. This reality is especially visible in countries rich in natural wealth. Burkina Faso is one example. Our land produces large quantities of gold each year. Yet many communities remain poor. Schools lack resources. Hospitals struggle with limited equipment. Young people search for opportunities that sometimes seem distant. This contradiction forces leaders to ask a difficult question. If the land is rich, why are the people still struggling? The answer is complex. It involves economic structures, international markets, governance challenges, and historical patterns of trade. But understanding the problem is only the first step. The real challenge is building a new path forward. Across the Sahel and beyond, many leaders and citizens now speak openly about the need for greater economic independence. This does not mean isolation from the world. No modern nation can thrive alone. International trade and cooperation remain essential, but cooperation must evolve. Partnerships must become more balanced. Africa must move beyond being only a supplier of raw materials. It must become a place where resources are transformed into finished products, where industries grow, where innovation emerges from local talent, where value is created within the continent itself. Imagine what it would mean if the gold mined in African soil helped build advanced manufacturing industries within Africa. Imagine if agricultural products grown by African farmers were processed locally before reaching global markets. Imagine if young engineers and entrepreneurs across the continent had the tools and support needed to build technology companies that serve both Africa and the world. These possibilities are not fantasies. They are realistic goals. But achieving them requires courage and patience. Economic transformation does not happen overnight. It requires investments in education. It requires infrastructure that connects communities and markets. It requires institutions capable of managing resources transparently and responsibly. And most importantly, it requires leadership committed to long-term progress rather than short-term advantage. In many ways, the conversation about Africa's future returns to the same theme we have discussed throughout this story: responsibility. Responsibility to protect national resources, responsibility to ensure that agreements with international partners benefit the people, responsibility to create opportunities for younger generations, and responsibility to pursue development without losing the moral values that sustain society. Faith plays an important role here as well, because faith reminds leaders that development is not only about wealth, it is about justice, it is about dignity, it is about ensuring that prosperity reaches communities that have long been marginalized. When a leader prays for wisdom before making decisions, he is not only asking for personal guidance, he is acknowledging the limits of his own knowledge. He is recognizing that the choices he makes will affect lives far beyond his own lifetime. That awareness can shape the direction of leadership. It can encourage patience rather than haste. It can inspire courage when difficult reforms are necessary. And it can remind leaders that true success is measured by the well-being of the people. Africa's vision for the future also includes stronger cooperation among its nations. The continent contains more than 50 countries, each with unique histories, languages, and cultures. Yet many of the challenges we face are shared: economic development, infrastructure, security, climate change, population growth. By working together, African nations can amplify their strengths. Regional partnerships like the Alliance of Sahel States represent one approach. The African Continental Free Trade Area represents another effort to strengthen economic integration across the continent. These initiatives aim to create larger markets, encourage investment, and allow African businesses to expand beyond national borders. But cooperation must always respect sovereignty. Each nation must retain the right to determine policies that reflect its own circumstances and priorities. Balance between unity and independence is essential. Africa does not seek confrontation with the world. Our continent seeks partnership built on mutual respect. The world benefits when Africa prospers. A stable and prosperous Africa contributes to global economic growth. It offers opportunities for cultural exchange, scientific collaboration, and shared innovation. And it demonstrates that regions once defined by hardship can become sources of progress. For this vision to become reality, several principles must guide our path: transparency in governance, investment in education, responsible management of natural resources, regional cooperation, and leadership grounded in integrity. These principles are not unique to Africa. They are the foundations of successful societies everywhere, but implementing them requires determination. Because every generation inherits both opportunities and challenges from the past. Africa's past includes extraordinary cultural achievements. It also includes periods of exploitation and political instability. Our responsibility now is to shape a future that honors the strengths of our history while correcting the mistakes that hindered our progress. Young Africans are already contributing to this transformation. Across the continent, entrepreneurs are launching businesses. Scientists are conducting research. Artists are sharing African stories with global audiences. Students are studying engineering, medicine, and technology. Their ambitions reveal something powerful. Africa is not waiting for the future. Africa is building it. Leaders must support this energy. They must create environments where innovation can flourish. They must ensure that natural resources become engines of development rather than sources of conflict. And they must build institutions capable of sustaining progress over many decades. None of this will happen through speeches alone. It will require daily work, careful planning, honest dialogue with citizens, and partnerships with the international community that respect Africa's sovereignty and aspirations. But perhaps the most important ingredient remains faith. faith that transformation is possible, faith that justice can replace exploitation, faith that unity can overcome division, and faith that the next generation will inherit a continent stronger and more prosperous than the one we know today. For me, leadership is not about personal legacy. It is about responsibility to the millions of people whose lives depend on the decisions made by those in power. When I think about the future of Africa, I think about the children growing up in villages and cities across the continent. Children who deserve schools filled with opportunity. Children who deserve healthcare, safety, and dignity. Children who deserve to believe that their dreams can be realized without leaving their homeland. Building that future will require courage from leaders and citizens alike. But courage is something Africa has never lacked. Our history is filled with examples of resilience. Communities rebuilding after hardship. Families supporting one another during times of difficulty. Nations rising again after periods of struggle. This resilience is our greatest resource. Stronger than gold. Stronger than oil, stronger than any mineral beneath the earth. It is the spirit of the people. And when that spirit is guided by faith, unity, and responsible leadership, the future becomes brighter. The core message of this final lesson is simple. Africa's future must be shaped by courage, responsibility, and vision. Its resources must benefit its people. Its partnerships must be balanced. And its leadership must remain guided by conscience and faith. Only then can the continent move toward a future where prosperity and dignity belong to every community. This vision does not belong to one country alone. It belongs to the entire continent. And to all those around the world who believe that justice, faith, and unity can shape a better tomorrow. My friends, as I come to the end of this long reflection, I want to slow my words for a moment. Because the future of nations is not written only in policy papers or international meetings. It is written in the hearts of people who decide what kind of world they want to build. I have spoken to you as a president, but also as a man who has spent many years asking difficult questions. Why is Africa rich in resources yet poor in opportunity? Why do agreements that promise prosperity sometimes leave communities behind? Why do powerful nations often shape decisions that affect people far beyond their own borders? These questions do not belong only to Africa. They belong to the entire human family. Across the world, people are asking similar questions about justice, responsibility, and leadership. In America, in Europe, in Asia, in the Middle East, people wonder whether leaders truly act in the interest of the people they serve. These concerns are universal, and the answers must begin with something very simple: truth. Truth about our past, truth about our mistakes, truth about our responsibilities. Without truth, no nation can move forward with dignity. When I speak about Africa's challenges, I do not speak with anger. Anger may capture attention for a moment, but it rarely builds a future. Instead, I speak with hope. Hope that the lessons of history can guide us toward wiser decisions. Hope that leaders everywhere will remember that power is not a prize to be enjoyed, but a responsibility to be carried carefully. Hope that nations will learn to cooperate in ways that respect the dignity of all people. Africa does not seek conflict with the world. Africa seeks fairness. Africa seeks partnership. Africa seeks the chance to transform its natural wealth into opportunity for its people. But beyond economics and politics, there is another message I want to leave with you today. It is a message about the human heart. Throughout history, the greatest transformations in society have not begun in parliaments, or presidential offices. They began when individuals decided to live differently. When people chose honesty over corruption, when communities chose unity over division, when leaders chose responsibility over personal ambition. These choices are not easy. Every generation faces temptations. The temptation of power, the temptation of wealth, the temptation to ignore injustice when it does not affect us personally. But faith reminds us that these temptations are not the final word. Faith reminds us that human beings are capable of choosing a better path. For Christians, the teachings of Jesus emphasize humility, compassion, and service to others. For Muslims, the teachings of Islam emphasize justice, charity, and accountability before God. Different traditions express these values in different ways, but the message is remarkably similar. Human beings are called to live with integrity. When leaders forget this truth, societies suffer. When leaders remember it, societies can flourish. This is why I have spoken so often about the importance of seeking guidance from God before making decisions that affect millions of lives. Not because prayer solves every problem, but because prayer reminds us that we are not the highest authority. It reminds us that we must answer to something greater than ourselves. For a leader, that realization can change everything. It can turn arrogance into humility. It can turn selfish ambition into service. It can turn fear into courage. The future of Africa will depend on many things: economic reforms, educational investments, technological innovation, stronger institutions. These are all important, but beneath all of them lies something even more important: character. The character of leaders, the character of citizens, the character of societies that decide what they will tolerate and what they will reject. If corruption becomes acceptable, corruption will grow. If injustice becomes normal, injustice will spread. But if honesty becomes the expectation and if responsibility becomes the standard, societies can transform themselves. I believe Africa is entering such a moment of transformation. Across the continent, people are questioning old systems. They are demanding accountability. They are asking leaders to remember who they serve. This awakening is not perfect. Change rarely is, but it reveals something powerful. The spirit of the African people remains strong. The same spirit that carried communities through centuries of hardship now seeks a new future. A future where resources build schools and hospitals. A future where young people can build businesses and careers without leaving their homeland. A future where African nations stand confidently in the world, cooperating with others while protecting their own dignity. And this future is not only important for Africa, it matters for the entire world. Because humanity shares one planet, our destinies are connected. When one region prospers, the whole world benefits. When one region suffers, the consequences eventually reach everyone. So I speak today not only to Africans, but to people everywhere. Let us remember that the future of our children depends on the choices we make today. Let us remember that leadership is not measured by power, but by service. Let us remember that faith, whether expressed through Christianity, Islam, or other traditions, calls us to live with honesty and compassion. And let us remember that the path of goodness is always open to those willing to walk it. If someone has wandered into corruption, they can return to integrity. If someone has chosen division, they can choose reconciliation. If someone has lost hope, they can rediscover purpose. The door to change is never completely closed, but it requires courage. Courage to admit mistakes, courage to reject injustice, courage to believe that a better future is possible. As I conclude these reflections, I want to leave you with a simple invitation. Wherever you are watching from, whether in Africa, America, Europe, or anywhere else, take a moment to reflect on the role each of us plays in shaping the world. Leadership is not limited to presidents or ministers. Every parent leads a family. Every teacher leads a classroom. Every citizen influences the direction of society. Your choices matter. Your voice matters. And your commitment to honesty and compassion can influence more lives than you may ever realize. If these reflections have spoken to you in any way, I hope you will continue this conversation, share your thoughts. Reflect on the ideas presented here. Encourage others to think about the relationship between leadership, faith, and responsibility. Because when conversations like this spread, they remind the world that people still care about truth and integrity. And if you wish to hear more reflections like this in the future, you may choose to remain connected to this channel where conversations about leadership, faith, and the future of our world will continue. Not as propaganda, not as empty rhetoric, but as honest reflection about the choices that shape nations and generations. Before I leave you, I want to repeat one simple declaration. A declaration not of power, but of responsibility. I am Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso. What I have spoken here is the truth. I am Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso. What I have spoken here is the truth. I am Ibrahim Traoré, President of Burkina Faso. What I have spoken here is the truth. May peace find its way into the hearts of nations. May Africa rise with dignity, and may all people choose the path of justice, faith, and compassion in the years ahead.